Hey everyone, welcome back to the Good E-Reader Radio Show. My name is Michael, and it's Monday, June the 9th, 2014, and I'm joined, of course, as I am every Monday, with one Jeremy Greenfield of Digital Book World. Jeremy, how are you doing this fine day?
I'm doing great. I had a beautiful weekend in the city of New York, and I'm excited to talk publishing.
Well, we can't talk about publishing, Jeremy, without mentioning an ongoing dispute that has been making waves across the entire industry with Amazon and Hachette. What is the latest happenings on this front?
Stalemate, it sounds like. Both companies have dug in for a long negotiations, and we haven't really heard much out of either of them since Book Expo America, but it's really been all the talk in the industry for the past few weeks. A lot of people saying that it's going to be a long, difficult negotiation. The two sides are very far apart. Some people saying that there are ways that the sides can compromise. But basically, I think the next date to watch out for on the calendar is June 19th when the Silkworm comes out. That following week, will it hit the bestseller lists as hard as it would have otherwise? Will the publisher Hachette have been successful at getting people to go outside of Amazon to pre-order that book? Because as we know, pre-orders are a huge part of getting onto the bestseller list, because what they do is they count up all those pre-orders from the past couple of months, and then when the book comes out, they all hit on that one day, and that's what propels a lot of those new releases right up onto the bestseller list. So we'll see if that happens.
So I had an article on our site about Hachette axing 3% of its U.S. workforce. Does this have anything to do with the Amazon dispute?
Well, what I have been told by the Hachette folks is that no, it was a planned reduction, and that it's separate from that. It's I don't want to say that I don't believe them, but it's sort of hard to believe that the things aren't somewhat related. If the company was going gangbusters in the beginning of the year, maybe that reduction would have happened. Maybe it is streamlining that has nothing to do with how well the company's doing. Maybe it's something that's been planned for a year or more. Or maybe it's planning for a long and drawn-out negotiation, getting a little bit slimmer and saving some money in the next year or so. The company has a little bit more in the tank if it has to go on a long negotiation. So I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but the company itself, it must be noted, says that it has nothing to do with the negotiation.
So Amazon just announced today a new subscription system. As you probably know, Jeremy, Amazon has I guess in about the last year, they've really been hyping to third-party websites and e-commerce services where you could pay with Amazon. So if you go to like an e-commerce site selling smartwatches or phones or what have you, Amazon allows them to be able to have their users pay for purchases with their Amazon account. And Amazon is expanding upon this service, going into subscriptions. And this is an arena most dominated by PayPal. When you think of paying for online subscriptions, you obviously think of PayPal first, but this is something that Amazon is getting involved in, where if you think about the Kindle Fire or maybe the Kindle e-readers with digital newspapers and magazines, you can now take out a subscription and actually pay those monthly subscriptions directly with your Amazon account. What we're hearing is that Amazon has scheduled a press event where they're undoubtedly going to announce their new smartphone. And what a lot of people are saying is that with this subscription system, you'll be able to actually pay your monthly phone bills directly to your Amazon account, thereby sort of bypassing the carriers altogether. So this actually raises an interesting question. If Amazon unveils a subscription system that will allow you to pay for your monthly phone bill directly with Amazon, do you think that this will cut out the phone carriers altogether?
I don't think it cuts out the phone carriers, because I'm not sure that. I mean, maybe Amazon's going to announce its own 4G network, but that is a multi-billion-dollar investment, and that's the kind of thing that the company can't, just hide. So probably, I don't think it's going to shut out the mobile carriers entirely, but it certainly opens up intriguing possibilities for self-published authors, for small publishers that want to maybe have a recurring payment system. And obviously so many third-party retailers use Amazon. I mean, this really makes it a very appealing option for them if they want to get creative with how they retail.
So we're all familiar with LinkedIn, but now we have a new social network that's sort of a part of it called InkedIN, and it's for authors. And when I originally heard about this story, Jeremy, I thought a social network just for authors. This sounds awesome, but apparently it's only for Simon and Schuster authors.
That's right. Simon & Schuster has launched, it's calling it InkedIn. It's a social network for its authors. I think it's a really interesting idea. I mean, we are in an era now where authors are making decisions around whether they want to work with publishers or not, where they have a lot more choice than what they had before. And, in this era of choice for authors, the publishers have to do more than just pay the biggest advance or promise better marketing. They've got to do as much as they can to say, hey, there's a lot of benefit for working with us. I think Simon & Schuster is really smart to think of this very innovative thing. Part of being an author that works with a big publisher is you're part of this elite club. But you're kind of, in the past, part of a club that, except for a couple of events here and there, and maybe you share an agent or something with somebody, you're not socializing with the other members of that club that much. But this gives those other members of that club a way to talk to each other. And I think that's really interesting, especially, in the era of social media, when talking to each other seems to be the thing that we constantly are wanting to do all the time. The other thing about it is that Simon & Schuster seems to have made a little bit of a bet on, business, business books and just getting into that market a little bit. It has that website 250 Words, which is a really interesting way of gathering sort of that Malcolm Gladwell business guru-focused audience. And, this sort of LinkedIn social network, I think, caters especially well to authors like that who want to share ideas and want to share innovation. So this is a really cool project for me. And I don't see a purpose in having a social network for all authors. Why not just use Facebook or Twitter, the existing social networks? But to have one that's a really small one, that's kind of an exclusive club, makes a lot of sense to me.
Did you hear about the new young adult movie that's in theaters right now, The Fault in Our Stars?
Absolutely, and it's congratulations to John Green and the folks who worked on that on the publishing side at Random House, Penguin Random House. It was a huge hit. It was a box office smash, almost raking in $50 million in its opening weekend. And for a non-comic book movie, that's a pretty strong opening weekend.
It is, and I think that the strength of this movie has it's really polarized a lot of publishing websites right now, where a lot of people are asking the question, should adults be reading YA fiction? It's sort of stimulated this old debate that's been around for at least 5 years or so. There was an article on Slate where they were saying that adults should feel guilty about reading YA fiction, because the more YA fiction adults consume, the less of a chance that a really good, elevated, high-level piece of literature will be published, because, hey, YA is selling, we'll just greenlight most of those titles. What are your thoughts on adults reading YA fiction? Because this is like an issue that's very contentious, and I guess over the weekend, based on this movie, it's sort of everybody's talking about it, from like the New York Times to the Wall Street Journal to blogs large and small.
Yeah, the thing is that there has been a shift in the editor and agent world and in the publishing side to trying to get to satisfy the demand for YA books. But publishers have to some extent always done this. What's hot, they're trying to replicate it. They're trying to piggyback on the next hit or the last big hit. That was really no different, I don't think, with YA being hot right now. And you saw that HarperCollins was able to not replicate, but to kind of imitate scholastic success of the Hunger Games with Divergent. So you can't blame the publishers, I don't think, for trying. But I think, telling people they should feel guilty for reading the thing that they want to read is like trying to stop the tide. It's just not going to work. It's not going to happen. And it's really just link bait, in my opinion. But they're certainly within their right to do that. That said, I think that publishing is also so fractured that even though there has been a shift toward YA a little bit, I don't think that it means that big important books are getting completely ignored. There have always been niche audiences for big important books and those next brilliant hits. I mean, it's very, very rare that a literary title even makes it onto the bestseller list. There are just a handful every year at most that touch the bestseller list. So I don't really think that makes a tremendous amount of sense. And honestly, as someone who is just pro books in all their forms and pro literacy and pro storytelling, I think most of the book publishing industry is this way. I'd rather see a lot of people reading YA than not reading at all.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of this falls back to the 2012 study that said 55% of all YA fiction is purchased by adults. So more than half of all YA books are purchased by adults. And I actually wrote a story about this, not talking about how adults should maybe feel guilty or not, or either way, but it's more about how our culture encourages us to perpetually relive our teenage years through unnatural and prolonged adolescence. And I quoted a lot of studies and reports. It's basically how 20s and 30 somethings you look at all the movies that are out, starring overgrown boy actors like Steve Carell or Luke and Owen Wilson, Jim Carrey, Adam Sandler, Will Ferrell, Seth Rogen. All those guys come out with multiple movies a year. They're like late 30s, early 40s, and it's all just, fart jokes, breast and crotch shots, beer pong, cheering awesome car crashes. And, I think it's that sort of mentality that, 30 is the new 20. You hear that a lot, or 40 is the new 30. You hear that about that all the time. And I think that, our culture is basically promoting prolonged adolescence. And in turn, people are reading the books that they did when they were teenagers, whether it's guys reading their sci-fi and fantasy books, or their cyberpunk, or girls reading their romance and erotica books that they did when they were teenagers, and they just kind of continue sticking with the books that they've always read in their 20s and their 30s. And I think that that's part of one of the reasons why YA fiction is read by adults, because it's the teenagers growing into adults that can't shake what they grew up reading and elevate themselves to a higher form of literature.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that explains it all. I mean, The Hunger Games is a pretty interesting, entertaining book, but I do think that you are tapping into an idea that a lot of people have been talking about over the past few years, is that we sort of have this new acceptance of not growing up, of constantly entertaining oneself and not, being responsible. Maybe that's a generational thing. Maybe it has to do with the new kinds of social technologies that we have. I don't really know, but I think that might be part of it, but I don't think that's the entire story. I mean, there have been a lot of interesting YA books. I mean, you can also point to that YA has grown up a little bit. Some of the themes in The Hunger Game were, pretty serious. There was a lot of violence in The Hunger Games. Maybe you wouldn't have seen as much of that in fiction for teenagers and tweens 20 or 30 years ago. And now you're seeing stuff that adults are maybe a little bit more interested in reading about, that resembles a little bit more adult literature. So I think there's a lot of stuff coming together here to make this trend.
Okay, one thing that I wanted to talk about, and I'm not sure if you were aware of this at all, but George R.R. Martin, the guy that did Game of Thrones, you may have heard of it. It's on TV. I think at least like 5 or 10 people watch it. So he's actually taken a novel approach in raising funds for charity. He's doing this thing with the Wild Spirit Wolf Sanctuary and the Food Depot of Santa Fe. Anybody who donates $20,000 will actually be by name in his next book and killed in a grisly fashion.
Hmm.
And they say that you could be a lordling, a knight, a peasant, a whore, or anybody kind of in that universe. But it kind of got me thinking that what about like kind of indie authors that have cultivated like a following that usually are sticking with one literary genre, whether it's like a romance and erotica writers or pulp sci-fi writers, maybe a way that they could actually make some money, because as we know with indie authors you don't get advances. You don't you're not belonging to a publishing label. You're pretty well self-financed from either your prior book sales, or if you're just starting out as an author, you really don't have like a lot of avenues to be able to have enough money to be able to just sit down for a few months and pump out a book. And it kind of got me thinking that, do you think maybe authors should like do some sort of campaign where they could put the readers in the book as either a main character or a minor character for like, maybe a few $100s or maybe like $1,000, and then use all this money from raising this to actually finance their next book?
Yeah, well, this has been done. Authors have done this, where they've asked people input on the ending of the book, or they've done a Kickstarter where as part of the Kickstarter a character can be named after you. So this has been done before, and I feel like, like a lot of really interesting ideas that come up in digital publishing that ebooks really make possible, it's marginal. It's cool, it's neat, it can be done well on a very small stage, but it's not something that's going to take the industry by storm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of a few particular authors in general, where I read like all their books. Like a Tom Robbins or a Douglas Copeland or a William Gibson. And I mean, if they ran a campaign where I could be like a character in their book, I think I would pay for that, just because I really like them as authors and I read all their books anyways. It'd be kind of cool to kick in like 5 Gs and have a character named after me, knowing that those books will be read by at least a few 100,000, if not a million plus people.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
this is just something that's interesting to me. Now, you wanted to talk about InTitle and what they're doing with Christian titles.
Yeah, so InTitles, is sort of one of the new ebook subscription services that's out there. It is more like a book club. You pay a set fee per month and have access to a large range of books, but you can only, and you get to own them. You can download them, you own them free and clear, but you can only do a couple a month for the set fee, whereas with Oyster and some of the others, it's sort of unlimited reading. So the company launched a new vertical that is dedicated toward Christian texts, fiction and nonfiction, and I think this is a really interesting idea because vertical subscription services have been around and have been working for a very long time. Safari is probably the best example of these services, and for these other more general services to sort of branch out and launch verticals, maybe that you can buy into at a lower cost, or use them as ways to bring people in for the larger vertical or the larger subscription service, I think is a really interesting idea. And I've been thinking a lot about these ideas because Wednesday is the Digital Book World ebook subscription service debate, and we are now in the final preparations working with both teams to make sure that they have their spears sharpened for the debate. And just thinking about ways that ebook subscription services can work for authors, publishers, and readers is something I've been really interested in lately.
Jeremy, I think it's time for the main event of the day. And this is something that I know we've talked a lot about this over the years. And Barnes and Noble is actually getting back into the tablet game, which we knew that they were doing from the last few shareholders announcements. But now the details are crystal clear. Barnes and Noble has put in an order for 1 million Samsung branded tablets for the 7-inch and the 10-inch variety. And Barnes & Noble is, for the first time ever, outsource the hardware design, the infrastructure to another company, therefore saving prospectively millions upon millions of dollars. And the only thing that the Barnes& and Noble team is doing is the software for this, and it's called Samsung for Nook. What do you know?
Well, I probably know less than you about it, or about the same. I don't have any inside dirt on this. But this is a good way for Samsung to sort of keep working on the digital content delivery business. It sort of abandoned its ebook business, its aspirations, about a year after it sort of announced them very quietly. And for Barnes and Noble, this should offload some cost in its tablet business and allow it to sort of stay in the game. That said, the companies that are succeeding in this area are just launching into it full throttle. When it comes to selling ebooks, I think Kobo and Apple are having some success battling Amazon outside of the U.S. And Amazon obviously hasn't taken its foot off the pedal in any of these areas in terms of building hardware or software or ebooks. And those companies are the ones that are just really going full throttle. And then you've got the ones that are sort of kind of trying to enter the business either on the hardware side or the software side or both, and they're not being successful. And I just think it's such a cutthroat business. There's so much at stake in the long term that this seems to me, a way for Barnes and Noble to sort of, slow its exit from this side of its business. I just don't see, with the company's leadership, with the company's direction, the company's fundamentals, it not separating from the retail stores, that Nook does not separate from the retail stores in some meaningful financial way in the next year or two.
So here's what we know with the hardware. The previous generation, Nook HD and HD Plus, which is still available in the US and UK, they use dual core chips. The Samsung will use quad core chips, so you should see snappier and better response time in games that you play or apps and this and that. And the one kind of downside is the resolution is actually lower on these new devices as opposed to the previous generation. So Barnes & Noble really hypes their magazines, their newspapers, their graphic novels, their kids' books, the read along with me books. It's all visually arresting stuff. And with lower resolution, I feel that maybe that this is stepping down a little bit. Things aren't going to look as crisp or clear as they once did. And if you look at what Amazon is doing with their tablets, I mean, Barnes & Noble is coming out with new devices that is significantly stepped down from the Google Nexus or the Amazon Kindle Fire HD Plus and things like that. So this is kind of yeah, I don't really know what Barnes & Noble is doing with this. I know it's way cheaper for them to just get the hardware from Samsung at a deal. And part of the contract that Barnes & Noble signed with Samsung was Samsung will promote these tablets for Barnes & Noble. So Barnes & Noble will have to spend less on a marketing budget because Samsung has said that, we're going to run print, we're going to run videos, we're going to really hype this up as, hype this up for you, sort of on your behalf. So my question is that Barnes & Noble is doing the software, and from screen grabs I've seen, it looks significantly different from prior models. So we've all seen the Nook HD, HD Plus, or maybe the Nook Color and Nook Tablet. Through the evolutionary process, the UI has changed, the main menus have changed, things have cumulatively seen an upgrade. But I really think that the software for this new tablet actually looks tremendous, and that's maybe one of the driving factors behind this. But what a lot of people are saying is that why would you buy the Samsung for Nook tablet when you could just get a stock Android tablet from Samsung, the 7-inch version, at a cheaper cost and actually use it internationally?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, and I think it's a similar question when you think about the marketing. So Samsung's going to market the Barnes & Noble Nook tablet against its own tablet. It's going to have to divide its marketing resources and tell people to go buy the Nook tablet. At the same time, tell people to go buy its tablet. It is a little confusing.
Yeah, no, it totally is. I mean, they're basically competing against themselves, but from my understanding is that this is the first time that Samsung has really done a white label tablet for somebody. So you're actually not going to see the quintessential Samsung bloatware that you might have seen on their Samsung Galaxy phones or their own tablets, where you have, the Samsung App Store and chat on, and sort of all the many apps that you can't actually uninstall when you buy these. A part of the agreement with Barnes and Noble is that you won't see any Samsung bloatware. You can think of it as a pure vanilla tablet, but with Barnes and Noble responsible for all of the software on this. My kind of question is do you think that Barnes and Noble will continue to just focus on the US and UK market, or do you think through the Samsung agreement that they'll actually expand into other European markets? Because Nook Press, if you remember a few months ago, actually expanded into like France and Spain and other markets where people in those countries could self-publish titles and actually list them on Nook Press. And so, do you think that this is setting the stage for the next generation Nook tablets actually being marketed for the first time outside of those two core markets?
When I first joined the book publishing industry, Barnes and Noble was gaining market share. It was losing money, but it was growing its revenue. And the Nook was this credible competitor. And then the Glowlight came out, and it was the first backlit e-reader. It was so smart, and Barnes and Noble was sort of like somehow staying in the game and competing. And just the past several years, the DOJ ruling and the ebook price fixing trial certainly didn't help, but the Nook business has really been flailing, and occasionally it'll come out with something that's interesting or good, but basically it's been not doing very, very well at all. I'd like to say that maybe this is a way Barnes and Noble is able to get into the international markets, but I just seen Barnes and Noble, become genius at missing opportunities and not executing well. It's really hard to put faith in the company that it's going to be able to do that. So I'm going to say no.
Yeah, I'm sadly, I think I'm along a similar vein of thought as you are. I'd probably say no as well, because following Barnes Noble ever since they made their very first device, it's almost like they continue to miss these awesome opportunities time and time again. So I really don't see them as doing an about face or righting the ship anytime soon. One of the last things I want to talk to you about today is audiobooks. And, as we know, audiobooks are on the upward trend. We're seeing a lot of books and we're seeing a lot of book sales. We've seen the audiobook industry grow from $480 million in 1997 to almost $2 billion in 2013. And a lot of people are getting into the audiobook game. We're seeing in the States, a large percentage of growth rate. In the UK right now, we're actually seeing a 6.8% growth rate in terms of revenues continuing to be on the upwards trend. In Germany, we're seeing audiobooks actually do better sales wise than ebooks, and 7% of the overall population in Germany is actually buying audiobooks or have listened to audiobooks. What are your thoughts on the audiobook industry in terms of how they're doing now and the potential for them to get even bigger?
Well, the success that audiobooks have seen over the past several years is due in part to downloaded audio being a greatly expanded category. And I expect that we will see that continue. I think audiobooks are just fantastic. We're also entering an era where it's very inexpensive for self-published authors to create audiobooks, where it's easy for even small publishers to produce and create audiobooks. And you've got the channels like audible.com clamoring for more content. So I see the trend continuing.
Yeah, same. I mean, I did a report on this, and CDs basically represented 78% of all audiobook sales in 2008. And then fast forwarding just a few years into 2013, and digital audiobook sales accounted for 61% of the industry. So in a few short years, the digital audiobook really kind of captured a lot of market share. And I think a lot of this is due to Audible, but also the Audiobook Creation Exchange, which is something that Amazon made a number of years ago, where it syncs up producers with authors. And if you have, say, Jeremy, you wrote a book, you could actually use ACX to find, you know, a producer or maybe a narrator if you want someone with a British accent, or someone to do like the remastering for you. You could actually have a book that you already wrote, or maybe your backlist of titles, and suddenly make like 5 or 6 different audiobook versions of it, and then put it out for sale on Audible or for iTunes or a number of other channels. And I think that this is sort of one sort of way that a lot of people haven't really talked about with audiobooks, where the backlist, people like Stephen King that has a huge backlist, or James Patterson that has a huge backlist of titles. I mean, these types of people could generate a copious amount of audiobooks by just making audiobook versions of their very latest titles, or their titles that they've written in the last 10 or 20 years. And this is something that really they haven't done, but I think for audiobooks to be taken to that next level, I think publishers really have to kind of focus on making audiobook versions of a very extensive backlist.
Yeah, and a lot of them have. And as the costs come down, and the costs have continued to come down, it will be easier for all kinds of publishers to do that. And I think there will come a time when the audio catalog isn't quite as large and diverse as the ebook catalog, but it will start to get really big, just like ebooks have.
Yeah, it looks like Macmillan and Simon and Schuster are very bullish about increasing audiobook sales. All of them have said that audiobook sales pretty well right now represent 10% of the ebook industry in the US, but they're really hoping to accelerate the growth to over 20% within the next 2 years. And that will really enhance the bottom line and be able to make going digital a little bit more viable, because you could have both ebooks and audiobooks. Jeremy, we've talked a lot about some very interesting issues today. Do you have any final thoughts?
I just would love to see everybody come to the Digital Book World ebook subscription debate Wednesday. It's this Wednesday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. It's free. You can go to digitalbookworld.com and click on the webcast button, and it'll take you right to a page where you can register for the webcast. We will be advertising it through our newsletters over the next few days and our Twitter feed at DigiBookWorld, and I hope to see all of you there.
All right. Well, I know I'll be there, and I encourage everyone else to check that out. On our front, we are making a number of crazy good enhancements to the Good Reader App Store these days. We have about 32,000 apps available right now, and we're actually in the process of doing a few things. One is implementing an auto update feature in our main Android client. So in the past, if you downloaded our client and you wanted to install an update, you had to go to our website, manually do it. It was jumping through a lot of hoops. Now we're making it so if there's an update to the Android client itself, when you fire it up, it'll automatically download and install it for you, which dramatically simplifies the process. We're actually also making a new user account system for our website. So if you do use our Android client and take advantage of our cloud storage system that keeps track of all the apps that you've ever installed, so if you buy a new device, you can easily install any of your favorite apps. We're bringing that feature to our web version of our app store, so you could actually have a cloud locker of all of your prior installed apps, and whatever apps that you may install from the website will actually show up now within the Android client itself. So a lot of kind of cool features, and we'll also be in Las Vegas in a week or two for the American Library Association annual conference. So if you want to be kept abreast of the situation in terms of digital in the library space, we'll be covering that conference in its entirety, so you can keep your browsers locked to GoodEreader.com for all of the pertinent information. So you've been listening to the Good eReader Radio Show, the #1 podcast in the world for publishing, ebooks, audiobooks, and all of that jazz. Everybody, take care.